The silence inside the car was a thing Cecilia could almost taste. It was denser, heavier than any sound she'd ever encountered. A suffocating, all-enveloping blanket, pierced only by the frantic, desperate rhythm of her own heartbeat. Outside the car's tinted windows, the city was a blur of indistinct streaks of light. Inside, however, everything felt suspended, frozen in time. Her father sat rigidly beside her, his face ashen, his hands balled into tight, white-knuckled fists resting on his knees. He refused to meet her gaze. "Remember," one of the large, unsmiling men in the front seat rumbled, his voice low and menacing. "You speak only when Mr. Augusto speaks to you. You look at him when he looks at you. You do not argue, understand?" Cecilia could only nod, her throat constricted, unable to form a single word. Her family was facing a crisis, a terrible predicament. A debt, her father had whispered the word with dread. A debt that couldn't be settled with mere money. The only currency of value left was her. The only man who possessed the power to erase that debt entirely was Augusto. They said he was a king in a shadowy world, the most powerful, influential figure in the entire city. They said his heart was carved from solid ice. The car didn't pull up to some flashy, ostentatious nightclub, but instead halted before a tall, imposing, dark building that seemed to absorb and swallow the very moonlight. The men led them through a silent lobby with marble floors that echoed their footsteps, and into a private elevator which ascended so high that Cecilia's ears popped. When the elevator doors finally slid open, they opened directly into what could only be described as his domain, his home. It wasn't at all what she'd anticipated. It was expansive and undeniably beautiful, yet utterly devoid of warmth, cold to the touch. Everything was rendered in shades of gray and black, as if the world had been stripped of all color. There were no personal family photos, no stacks of well-loved, messy books. It was clearly the home of a man who lived entirely alone, a man who seemingly needed absolutely no one. They were escorted to a set of imposing double doors. One of the men knocked once, a sharp, authoritative rap, then opened the doors, gesturing for Cecilia alone to enter. Her father cast her a desperate, sorrowful look before the doors closed with a soft click, separating them completely. She was utterly alone now. Augusto's office was enormous, dominated by a vast wall of glass that offered a panoramic view of the glittering cityscapes sprawling below. He stood with his back to her, a tall, broad-shouldered silhouette outlined against the dazzling lights. He didn't turn around, not immediately. He simply stood there, allowing the silence to stretch, to intensify, letting her fear take root and slowly creep up her legs, paralyzing her. Cecilia clasped her hands tightly together, trying to still their trembling. She had to be brave, she told herself. She absolutely had to be. Finally, he turned to face her. Cecilia's breath caught in her throat. He was younger than she had imagined him to be, but his eyes held an age that belied his youth. They were a dark, intense brown, and they regarded her not with anger or malice, but with a deep, unsettling calm. He possessed a sharp, dangerous kind of handsomeness, like a beautifully crafted knife, honed to a razor's edge. He moved toward his desk, not with any undue haste, but with the calculated, deliberate grace of a predator, a grace that made every single step feel significant. "Cecilia," he said, speaking her name, and it wasn't a question, nor an inquiry. It was a statement, a claiming, an assertion of power. His voice was deep and smooth, and it seemed to wrap around her in the quiet room, ensnaring her. He stopped on the opposite side of the large, dark wood desk, his gaze slowly sweeping over her from head to toe, carefully cataloging her. It felt almost like a physical touch, intimate and invasive. It wasn't the crude, hungry look she'd encountered from other men in the past. This was something entirely different, altogether more unsettling. He was assessing her, studying her like a rare, valuable piece of art he was seriously considering acquiring. "I understand your father has a problem," he said, his tone almost conversational, as if they were simply discussing the weather or some other triviality. "A rather significant problem, one that will see both him and your sweet mother in a very deep, inescapable hole if it isn't resolved by sunrise. Cecilia forced herself to meet his eyes, to hold his gaze. It was the most difficult thing she had ever done. Looking into them was like staring directly into the heart of a raging storm. "Yes," she whispered, her voice barely audible, then cleared her throat, attempting to find a stronger tone. "Yes, he does." Augusto's lips curved into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. He appreciated the correction, the show of defiance. He leaned forward, placing his palms flat on the surface of the desk. The gesture somehow made him seem even larger, even more imposing, even more powerful. "I can make that problem disappear," he said, his eyes locked intently on hers, as if it never existed. "Your family will be safe forever. No one will ever bother them again. They can go back to their quiet little lives, just like before." "And what?" Cecilia's voice trembled slightly, but she maintained his gaze. "What is the price?" "The price," he said, straightening up and slowly circling around the desk, "is you." He stopped just a few feet away from her. She could detect his cologne now, a scent that was dark and warm and intoxicating, like sandalwood and spice. It was undoubtedly the unmistakable scent of power, of dominance. "You will marry me tonight," he stated, his voice unwavering. It was not a request, not an invitation, not a question up for debate. It was the only conceivable way. "You will leave your old life behind, completely and utterly. You will belong to me and only me." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, but she stubbornly refused to let them fall, refused to show him weakness. Belong to him. The words were so final, so absolute, so terrifying. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, laced with disbelief. For the first time since she'd entered the room, his cool, composed expression shifted slightly. A spark of something raw and hot flickered briefly in his dark eyes. He closed the small distance between them. He didn't touch her. Not yet. But she could feel the heat radiating from his body, a palpable intensity. "Because," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur that seemed to vibrate right through her, leaving her skin tingling. "When you walked in here, you were terrified. I could smell your fear. But you looked me straight in the eye. You didn't cry. You didn't beg for mercy. You stood there like a little queen facing her executioner, and you asked me the price." He reached out then, but not to seize her, not to intimidate her. He moved slowly, deliberately, giving her every opportunity to recoil, to pull away, to refuse. His fingers, strong and warm, came up to gently trace the delicate line of her jaw. It was the very first time he had touched her, and a jolt, like a tiny lightning bolt, shot straight down her spine, leaving her breathless. Her skin tingled everywhere his finger made contact. She gasped softly, a small, shaky sound she couldn't suppress, couldn't hold back. Augusto's eyes darkened with a new, fierce intensity at that sound, that reaction. The air in the room seemed to crackle with energy, growing thick and almost impossible to breathe. "I have spent my entire life surrounded by liars and thieves and people who only want something from me," he whispered, his thumb gently stroking her cheekbone. "I see a strength in you, Cecilia. A fire, a spark, and I want it." His words were having a profound effect on her, doing strange things to her senses. The fear was still present, a cold knot tightening in her stomach. But now something else was beginning to mix with it, something unexpected. A wild, thrilling heat was spreading from where his skin met hers, warming her from the inside out. It was confusing and scary and undeniably exciting, all at the same time. "This is not just a business deal," he vowed, his face so close to hers now that she could see the flecks of gold in his dark brown eyes. "This is a vow. I will protect your family. I will shield them with my own life. But you will not just be my wife in name alone." He leaned in even closer, his lips almost brushing against her ear, his warm breath fanning her skin, making her shiver involuntarily. "Tonight you will take all of me." Cecilia's heart hammered wildly against her ribs, threatening to burst. The words were a command, an order, but they also felt like a desperate, heartfelt promise. "You will take my name," he continued, his voice a low, steamy whisper that sent shivers down her spine. You will take my protection. You will take my body. And before this night is over, you will have all of me. My past, my secrets, my deepest fears, my heart, every last piece of it. And in return, I will have all of you. Your courage, your spirit, your innocence, everything. He finally pulled back just enough to look into her eyes again, searching her face intently, as if trying to decipher her very soul. The world outside the window, her family's desperate troubles. It all faded away, became insignificant. There was only him, this powerful, dangerous man, offering her everything that he was in exchange for everything that she was. The choice was essentially an illusion, and they both knew it. But in that moment, with her skin still burning from his touch and his vow echoing in the silent, spacious room, it didn't feel like a prison sentence. Not exactly. It felt like the beginning of a dangerous, beautiful storm, and she was standing right in the very eye of it. The wedding itself was a blur of shadows and whispered words. It took place in a small, dimly lit chapel located within Augusto's own building, witnessed by stone-faced men in dark, impeccably tailored suits. A priest with tired, world-weary eyes spoke the ancient words, and Cecilia repeated them in a voice that barely sounded like her own. Augusto's voice, however, was firm and clear, each word a solemn vow etched in stone. When he slid a heavy, cold band of platinum onto her finger, it felt less like a piece of jewelry and more like a lock clicking firmly shut, sealing her fate. Now they were in his private wing, in a bedroom so vast that the far walls seemed to disappear into the gloom. The door clicked closed behind them, and the sound was more final, more absolute than any "I do." They were alone, truly and completely alone. Cecilia stood frozen in the center of the room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself as if trying to ward off the unknown. She could feel Augusto's presence behind her, a warm, solid, powerful force field. The silence in the room was a living thing, pressing in on her from all sides, suffocating her. This was the moment she had dreaded, the moment she had been steeling herself for. She heard him move, his footsteps muffled and quiet on the plush, luxurious rug. He didn't come to her immediately. Instead, he walked over to a large cabinet and poured a single glass of amber liquid, presumably some type of liquor. He didn't drink it himself, however. He came to stand beside her and held the glass out to her. "Your hands are shaking," he said, his voice low and surprisingly gentle. "This will help." She glanced at the glass, then at his hand holding it. His fingers were long and strong, the hands of a man who could command an entire city, or just as easily break it. Slowly, hesitantly, she uncurled one of her hands from around her arm and took the glass from him. The liquid was smooth and warm as it slid down her throat, spreading a false, temporary courage through her veins as she took a small, tentative sip. Augusto watched her intently, his dark eyes missing absolutely nothing. "Are you afraid of me, Cecilia?" She wanted to lie, to be the brave, fearless queen he seemed to think she was. But the truth spilled out of her before she could stop it. "Yes." He nodded slowly, as if he respected her honesty far more than any false display of strength. "Good," he murmured almost to himself. "A little fear is wise, but you do not need to be afraid of this." He gestured between the two of them, a subtle movement. "Not tonight." He took the glass from her and set it aside on a nearby table. Then he did something that genuinely shocked her, something she hadn't anticipated in the slightest. He reached up and slowly, carefully, began to remove the pins from her hair. One by one, they clattered softly onto the table. She stood perfectly still, barely daring to breathe, her heart thundering in her chest as her hair tumbled down around her shoulders, a dark cascade. His fingers brushed lightly against her neck, and another one of those electric shivers raced through her body, leaving her skin tingling. "There," he said, his voice husky, almost rough. "That's better." He moved to stand directly behind her again, so close that she could feel the heat of his chest against her back. His hands came to rest lightly on her shoulders, his thumbs gently kneading the tight, frightened muscles there. "Breathe, Cecilia," he whispered into her hair. His breath was warm and fragrant, and his scent, that intoxicating dark sandalwood, completely enveloped her. Just breathe. She let out a breath she hadn't even realized she was holding, her body swaying slightly into his touch, seeking comfort. His hands were so warm, his touch firm yet incredibly gentle. It wasn't at all what she had expected, what she had braced herself for. She had anticipated being taken, claimed roughly and quickly, without any regard for her own feelings. This careful, deliberate unraveling was somehow far more potent, far more overwhelming. His hands slowly slid down her arms, leaving a trail of fire in their wake, until his fingers laced with hers. He turned her slowly to face him. In the soft, subdued light of the bedroom, he looked different, transformed. The ruthless king, the powerful mafia boss, was gone, at least for the moment. In his place stood a man, his gaze intense but surprisingly soft, his jaw relaxed, his expression almost vulnerable. He lifted a hand and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin with infinite tenderness. "I told you," he said, his eyes searching hers, probing her very soul. "You will take all of me, but I will not take from you. You will give yourself to me willingly. Do you understand the difference?" She could only nod, her voice lost somewhere in her throat, unable to articulate her thoughts. "Tell me you trust me," he urged, his voice a low, intimate caress that sent shivers down her spine. It was a crazy thing to ask, an absurd request. A day ago, she hadn't even known he existed, hadn't known such a man could even exist. But here now, in this moment, with his hand gently cradling her face and his eyes promising not just passion but also a strange kind of safety, she found that she did. In this one, strange, inexplicable way, she trusted him completely, implicitly. "I trust you," she whispered, the words barely audible, yet filled with sincerity. The words were a key, unlocking something within him. A slow, devastatingly beautiful smile touched his lips, transforming his face. He leaned down and finally, at long last, his mouth found hers. It wasn't a hard, demanding kiss. It was a question, a soft, searching pressure that was asking for permission, seeking her consent. It was her first kiss, and it was melting her. The silence inside the car was a tangible thing, a weight pressing down on Cecilia far more intensely than any sound she'd ever encountered. It was a thick, suffocating blanket, its stillness broken only by the frantic, desperate hammering of her own heart against her ribs. Outside the dark-tinted windows, the city was a blur of elongated streaks of light, colors bleeding into one another. But inside the vehicle, everything felt frozen, paralyzed in a state of dread. Her father sat rigidly beside her, his face ashen, his hands clenched into tight, white-knuckled fists on his knees. He avoided her gaze, refusing to meet her eyes. "Remember," one of the large, unsmiling men in the front seat said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "You speak only when Mr. Augusto speaks to you. You look at him when he looks at you. You do not argue with him." Cecilia nodded mutely, her throat constricted, too tight to allow any words to escape. Her family was embroiled in terrible, unimaginable trouble. A debt, her father had whispered in a hushed, fearful tone. A debt so immense it couldn't be repaid with money. The only currency they had left was her. The only man who possessed the power to erase the debt completely was Augusto. They said he was a king in a world of shadows, the most powerful man in the entire city, a figure shrouded in mystery and fear. They said his heart was carved from ice, incapable of warmth or compassion. The car finally slowed to a stop, not in front of some flashy, ostentatious nightclub, but before a tall, imposing, dark building that seemed to absorb the very moonlight, casting long, ominous shadows. The men led them through a silent lobby, the floor a vast expanse of polished marble, and into a private elevator that ascended so high and so quickly that Cecilia's ears popped painfully. When the elevator doors slid open, they opened directly into his home, his personal sanctuary. It wasn't at all what she had expected, the place her imagination had conjured. It was vast and undeniably beautiful, but it was also cold, devoid of any warmth. Everything was rendered in shades of gray and black, as if the world had been drained of color. There were no family photos adorning the walls, no stacks of messy books piled on tables. It was clearly the home of a man who lived entirely alone, a man who seemingly needed no one. They were led to a set of imposing double doors. One of the men knocked once, a sharp, authoritative rap, then opened the doors, gesturing silently for only Cecilia to enter. Her father gave her a desperate, sorrowful look, his eyes filled with unspoken regret and fear, before the door closed, irrevocably separating them. She was utterly alone. Augusto's office was enormous, a sprawling space dominated by a wall of glass that offered a breathtaking view of the entire glittering city sprawled out below. He stood with his back to her, a tall, broad-shouldered silhouette outlined against the dazzling lights. He didn't turn around, didn't acknowledge her presence in any way. He simply stood there, allowing the silence to stretch, to thicken, letting her fear take root and crawl up her legs like a creeping vine. Cecilia clasped her hands together tightly in a desperate attempt to stop them from shaking uncontrollably. She would be brave, she told herself. She had to be. Finally, he turned. Cecilia's breath caught in her throat. He was younger than she had imagined, but his eyes were ancient, holding a weight of experience that belied his age. They were a dark, intense brown, and they looked at her not with anger or malice, but with a deep, unsettling calm that sent a shiver down her spine. He was handsome in a sharp, dangerous way, like a beautifully crafted knife, its beauty only masking its lethal potential. He moved towards his desk, not with a hurried rush, but with a predator's grace, each step deliberate and purposeful, imbued with a sense of controlled power that made every movement feel significant. Cecilia, he said, her name, and it wasn't a question, not an inquiry seeking confirmation. It was a statement, a claiming, a pronouncement of possession. His voice was deep and smooth, like dark velvet, and it wrapped around her in the quiet room, enveloping her in its rich timbre. He stopped on the other side of the large, dark wood desk, his gaze sweeping over her from head to toe, an assessing, measuring look. Felt almost like a physical touch, invasive and probing. It wasn't the gross, hungry look she'd become accustomed to receiving from other men, the leering, objectifying gaze that made her skin crawl. This was different, far more unsettling. He was assessing her, studying her intently, as if she were a rare piece of art he was considering acquiring, evaluating its worth and potential. I understand your father has a problem, he said, his tone conversational, almost casual, as if they were discussing the weather, engaging in polite small talk. A rather large problem, one that will see him and your sweet mother in a very deep hole if it is not solved by sunrise tomorrow. Cecilia forced herself to meet his eyes, to hold his gaze without flinching. It was the hardest thing she had ever done, demanding every ounce of her willpower. Looking into them was like staring into the heart of a storm, turbulent and unpredictable, filled with hidden depths and dangerous currents. Yes, she whispered, her voice barely audible, then cleared her throat, summoning a stronger, more confident tone. Yes, he does. Augusto's lips curved into a slight, almost imperceptible smile. He appreciated the correction, the subtle assertion of strength. He leaned forward, placing his palms flat on the desk, his fingers spread wide. The gesture made him seem even bigger, more imposing, more powerful, as if he were a force of nature barely contained. I can make that problem disappear, he said. His eyes locked on hers, unwavering in their intensity, as if it never existed. Your family will be safe, forever protected. No one will ever bother them again. They can go back to their quiet little lives, their peaceful existence undisturbed. And what? Cecilia's voice trembled, betraying her fear, but she stubbornly held his gaze, refusing to look away. What is the price I have to pay? The price, he said, straightening up and walking slowly around the desk, his movements measured and deliberate, is you. He stopped a few feet from her, close enough that she could feel the force of his presence. She could smell his cologne now, something dark and warm, like sandalwood and spice, an intoxicating and exotic blend. It was the scent of power, the very essence of his dominance. "You will marry me tonight," he stated, his voice leaving no room for argument or negotiation. It was not a request, not a polite inquiry. It was not a question seeking her consent. It was the only way, the only possible solution. "You will leave your old life behind, abandon everything you know. You will belong to me, body and soul." Tears pricked at the corners of her eyes, threatening to spill over, but she resolutely refused to let them fall, refusing to show him any weakness. Belong to him. The words were so final, so absolute, so utterly devoid of any hope. "Why me?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper, a fragile plea lost in the vastness of the room. For the first time, his cool, impassive expression shifted, revealing a flicker of something raw and hot, a spark of untamed intensity that burned in his dark eyes. He closed the small distance between them, invading her personal space. He didn't touch her, but she could feel the heat radiating from his body, the almost palpable energy that surrounded him. She had to tilt her head back slightly to keep looking at him, to maintain eye contact. "Because," he said, his voice dropping to a low, intimate murmur that seemed to vibrate right through her, resonating deep within her soul. "When you walked in here, you were terrified, trembling with fear. I could smell it, the scent of your terror, but you looked me straight in the eye, unflinching. You didn't cry, didn't beg for mercy. You stood there like a little queen facing her executioner, and you asked me the price." He reached out then, but not to grab her, not to seize her against her will. He moved slowly, deliberately, giving her every opportunity to pull away, to recoil from his touch. His fingers, strong and warm, came up to gently trace the line of her jaw, his touch feather-light. It was the first time he had touched her, and a jolt, like a tiny lightning bolt, shot straight down her spine, electrifying her senses. Her skin tingled everywhere his finger touched, a burning sensation that both frightened and intrigued her. She gasped, a small, shaky sound she couldn't hold back, an involuntary response to his touch. Augusto's eyes darkened with a new, fierce intensity at that sound, a primal hunger that made her heart pound even faster. The air in the room crackled with an unspoken tension, growing thick and hard to breathe, charged with an almost palpable energy. "I have spent my life surrounded by liars and thieves and people who want something from me," he whispered, his thumb stroking her cheekbone with a possessive tenderness. "I see a strength in you, Cecilia, a fire, a resilience, and I want it." His words were doing strange things to her, stirring emotions she didn't understand, igniting a forbidden curiosity. The fear was still there, a cold knot twisting in her stomach, but now something else was mixing with it, something dangerous and intoxicating. A wild, thrilling heat was spreading from where his skin met hers, warming her from the inside out, melting her defenses. It was confusing and scary and undeniably exciting, a heady and disorienting mix of emotions. "This is not just a business deal," he vowed, his face so close now she could see the gold flecks in his dark brown eyes, the intricate details she hadn't noticed before. "This is a vow, a sacred commitment. I will protect your family, shield them from harm with my very life. But you will not just be my wife in name, a mere formality." He leaned in, his lips almost brushing her ear, his warm breath fanning her skin, making her shiver involuntarily. "Tonight you will take all of me," he whispered, the words a command, but also a desperate promise, a plea for connection. "You will take my name," he continued, his voice a low, steamy whisper that sent shivers dancing down her spine. "You will take my protection, my power, my unwavering loyalty. You will take my body, explore its depths and secrets. And before this night is over, you will have all of me. My past, my secrets, my hidden vulnerabilities, my heart, every last piece, every broken fragment. And in return, I will have all of you. Your courage, your spirit, your unwavering innocence, everything that makes you who you are." He finally pulled back just enough to look into her eyes again, searching her face, seeking a flicker of understanding, a sign of acceptance. The world outside the window, her family's desperate trouble, it all faded away, becoming insignificant, irrelevant. There was only him, this powerful, dangerous man, offering her everything he was, his entire being, in exchange for everything she was, her very essence. The choice was an illusion, a carefully constructed facade, and they both knew it, understood the unspoken truth. But in that moment, with her skin still burning from his touch and his vow echoing in the silent, spacious room, it didn't feel like a prison sentence, a life of forced servitude. It felt like the beginning of a dangerous, beautiful storm, a tempestuous journey, and she was standing right in the eye of it, drawn in by its irresistible force. The wedding was a blur of shadows and whispers, a surreal and unsettling ceremony. It happened in a small, dimly lit chapel tucked away within Augusto's own building, a hidden sanctuary. The witnesses were stone-faced men in dark suits, their expressions unreadable, their presence both intimidating and ominous. A priest with tired eyes and a weary demeanor spoke the words, the ancient vows, and Cecilia repeated them in a voice that didn't sound like her own, a hollow echo of the commitment she was making. Augusto's voice, however, was firm and clear, each word a vow etched in stone, a testament to his unwavering intent. When he slid a heavy, cold band of platinum onto her finger, it felt less like a piece of jewelry, a symbol of love and commitment, and more like a lock clicking shut, sealing her fate. Now they were in his private wing, secluded and isolated, in a bedroom so vast the far walls seemed to disappear into the gloom, swallowed by the shadows. The door clicked closed behind them, and the sound was more final, more irrevocable, than any I do could ever be. They were alone, truly completely alone, separated from the rest of the world. Cecilia stood frozen in the center of the room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself in a protective gesture, her body tense and rigid. She could feel Augusto's presence behind her, a warm, solid force field radiating power and intensity. The silence was a living thing, pressing in on her, suffocating her with its weight. This was the moment she had dreaded, the culmination of all her fears. She heard him move, his footsteps quiet on the plush rug, barely disturbing the silence. He didn't come to her immediately, didn't rush to claim her. Instead, he walked to a large cabinet and poured a single glass of amber liquid, his movements deliberate and controlled. He didn't drink it himself. He came to stand beside her and held it out, offering it as a gesture of comfort. "Your hands are shaking," he said, his voice low and soothing. "This will help to calm your nerves." She looked at the glass, then at his hand holding it. His fingers were long and strong, the hands of a man who could command a city, who could wield immense power, or break someone with equal ease. Slowly, hesitantly, she uncurled one of her own hands from her arm and took the glass. The liquid was smooth and warm as it slid down her throat, spreading a false courage through her veins as she took a small sip. Augusto watched her, his dark eyes missing nothing, observing every nuance of her reaction. "Are you afraid of me, Cecilia?" he asked, his voice soft but insistent. She wanted to lie, to be the brave queen he thought she was, to project an image of unwavering strength. But the truth tumbled out, escaping her control. "Yes," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded, almost imperceptibly, as if he respected the honesty more than a false show of strength, as if he valued her vulnerability. "Good," he murmured, a hint of something akin to approval in his tone. "A little fear is wise, but you do not need to be afraid of this." He gestured between the two of them, encompassing the situation, the night ahead. "Not tonight." He took the glass from her and set it aside, the clink of the glass against the table echoing in the silence. Then he did something that shocked her, something she hadn't anticipated. He reached up and slowly, carefully began to take the pins out of her hair. One by one, they clattered softly onto a nearby table, the delicate sound amplified in the quiet room. She stood perfectly still, her heart thundering in her chest as her hair tumbled down around her shoulders, a cascade of dark waves. His fingers brushed against her neck, sending another one of those electric shivers racing through her, an uncontrollable physical response to his touch. "There," he said, his voice husky with suppressed emotion. That's better. He moved to stand behind her again, so close she could feel the heat of his chest against her back, the steady rhythm of his breathing. His hands came to rest on her shoulders, his thumbs gently kneading the tight, frightened muscles there, easing the tension. Breathe, Cecilia, he whispered into her hair, his breath warm against her skin. His scent, that dark sandalwood, surrounded her, enveloping her in its intoxicating embrace. Just breathe. She let out a breath she didn't know she was holding, her body swaying slightly into his touch, instinctively seeking his support. His hands were so warm, his touch firm yet incredibly gentle, a paradox that both confused and soothed her. It wasn't what she had expected. She had anticipated being taken, claimed roughly and quickly, a transaction devoid of tenderness. This careful unraveling, this slow seduction, was somehow more powerful, more intimate, more terrifying. His hands slid down her arms, leaving a trail of fire in their wake, a burning sensation that intensified with each passing moment, until his fingers laced with hers, holding her captive. He turned her slowly to face him, his movements deliberate and gentle. In the soft light of the bedroom he looked different, transformed. The ruthless king, the powerful Mafia boss, was gone, replaced by a man. His gaze intense but soft, his jaw relaxed, his expression vulnerable. He lifted a hand and cupped her cheek, his thumb stroking her skin with a delicate touch. "I told you," he said, his eyes searching hers, seeking a connection, a sign of understanding. "You will take all of me, but I will not take from you, not against your will. You will give yourself to me freely, willingly. Do you understand the difference?" She could only nod, her voice lost somewhere in her throat, choked by emotion. "Tell me you trust me," he urged, his voice a low, intimate caress that resonated deep within her. It was a crazy thing to ask, an absurd request given the circumstances. A day ago, she didn't even know he existed, had no concept of his world. But here now, with his hand on her face and his eyes promising not just passion but safety, not just dominance but protection, she found that she did, against all reason. In this one strange way, defying all logic, she trusted him completely, with a faith she couldn't explain. "I trust you," she whispered, the words a key, unlocking something within him. A slow, devastating smile touched his lips, transforming his face, radiating a warmth that chased away the shadows. He leaned down and finally his mouth found hers, initiating contact. It was not a hard, demanding kiss, not a forceful claim. It was a question, a soft, searching pressure that asked for permission, sought her consent. It was her first kiss, and it was melting her from the inside out, dissolving her fears and reservations. Her hands, which had been clenched at her sides, came up to rest tentatively on his chest, a hesitant exploration. She could feel the powerful, steady beat of his heart beneath her palm, a reassuring rhythm. It was racing just like hers, mirroring her own frantic pulse. He deepened the kiss slowly, his tongue tracing the seam of her lips until she parted for him on a soft sigh, surrendering to the moment. The world narrowed to this, to the sensation of his lips on hers, the taste of him, the feel of his strong arms wrapping around her, pulling her flush against his hard body, eliminating any space between them. The fear was still there, lurking in the shadows, but it was being chased away by a new, thrilling heat that pulled low in her stomach, a dangerous desire she couldn't deny. He broke the kiss, both of them breathing heavily, gasping for air. Without a word, he swept her up into his arms as if she weighed nothing, his strength effortless. He carried her to the large bed, laying her down on the soft covers as if she were made of glass, a precious, fragile thing to be handled with the utmost care. He undressed her not with hurried, frantic hands, not with a lustful frenzy, but with a reverence that stole her breath, a hushed respect that disarmed her. Each button of her simple dress was a small ceremony, a deliberate act of intimacy. Each new inch of skin he revealed was met with a soft touch of his fingers or a brush of his lips, a tender caress that banished her insecurities. When she was bare before him, vulnerable and exposed, she didn't feel ashamed or self-conscious. She felt seen, truly seen, acknowledged for the first time in her life. He shed his own clothes with a fluid grace, and her eyes widened, drawn to the sight of him. He was all hard muscle and smooth skin, a sculpted physique, a map of power etched onto his body. There were a few old, faded scars, silent reminders of a life lived on the edge, a testament to his resilience. He was magnificent, a breathtaking work of art. He joined her on the bed, his body covering hers, supporting his weight on his arms, careful not to crush her. He kissed her again and again, his mouth moving from her lips to her jaw, down the column of her neck to the sensitive hollow of her throat, exploring every inch of her skin. Cecilia's hands tangled in his dark hair, her fingers digging into his scalp, a low moan escaping her lips as he found a particularly sensitive spot, igniting a fire within her. Augusto, his name was a plea on her lips, a desperate sound, though she didn't know what she was asking for, what she needed. "I know, my Cecilia," he murmured against her skin, his voice thick with desire. "I know." His hands explored her, learning the landscape of her body, mapping her curves and contours. They cupped her breasts, his thumbs circling her nipples until they were tight, aching buds, begging for his touch. They skimmed down her stomach, making her muscles quiver uncontrollably. And when his fingers finally gently touched the very core of her, the seat of her desire, she jumped, startled by the intensity of the sensation. "Sure," he soothed, his voice thick with a desire he was carefully controlling, holding back his own needs for her sake. "It's just me, just us." He touched her there with a skill and patience that made her mind go blank, erasing all thoughts and inhibitions. The scary feelings evaporated, replaced by a building tension, a coil of pure pleasure winding tighter and tighter inside her, threatening to snap. She was moving against his hand now, little desperate movements, her breath coming in ragged gasps, her body betraying her longing. "Augusto, I feel," she stammered, unable to articulate the overwhelming sensations. "Let go, Cecilia," he commanded softly, his voice a velvet caress. "I have you, I will catch you." And she did, she trusted him implicitly. The coil snapped, and a wave of pleasure so intense it was almost unbearable crashed over her, engulfing her senses. She cried out, her body arching against his as the sensations rippled through her, leaving her boneless and trembling, utterly spent. Before she could even recover, before she had time to process what had just happened, he shifted over her, positioning himself between her legs. He looked into her eyes, his own dark with passion and something deeper, something tender, something vulnerable. "This will hurt," he said, his voice raw with emotion, honest and unvarnished, but only for a moment, a brief, fleeting pain. "Look at me, focus on me." She did. She held his gaze, trusting him implicitly. She held his gaze as he positioned himself and with one slow, firm thrust joined their bodies together, completing the union. There was a sharp, brief pain, a fleeting moment of discomfort, and she flinched, a tear escaping from the corner of her eye, betraying her vulnerability. Augusto stilled completely, his body rigid with the effort of controlling himself, restraining his own desire. He leaned down and kissed the tear away, a gesture of tenderness and reassurance. "It's over," he whispered, his voice a soothing balm. "The pain is over now, it's finished. There is only us, only this connection." He began to move slowly at first, and he was right. The pain was gone, replaced by a feeling of fullness, of completeness, of a connection so deep it felt spiritual, transcendent. He moved within her, a slow, deep rhythm that felt less like taking and more like a sacred dance, a joining of souls. With every thrust, he whispered her name, a litany of devotion. With every sigh, he buried his face in her hair, inhaling her scent, losing himself in her. For Augusto, this was a revelation, a profound awakening. He had known women before, but it had always been about power, about control, or about fleeting release. This was different, something he had never experienced. Holding her, feeling her trust, her innocent responses, her unyielding spirit. It was like coming home after a lifetime of being lost, a sense of belonging he had never known. He felt a crack in the ice around his heart, a warm, blinding light pouring in, melting the frozen barriers. She was his, claimed by him, but he was, to his utter astonishment, becoming hers, surrendering his control. For Cecilia, the last of her fear melted away, banished by his tenderness. The powerful Mafia boss was gone, replaced by a man, vulnerable in his passion, tender in his possession, honest in his emotions. He was showing her a part of himself no one else had ever seen, revealing his hidden depths. And as her body began to climb towards another, even higher peak of pleasure, she knew this wasn't just about a deal anymore, not simply a transaction to save her family. This was the beginning of something real, something profound, something life-altering. When his control finally shattered, and he found his own release with a guttural cry of her name, a primal sound of surrender, he collapsed against her, then quickly rolled, taking her with him, keeping her nestled in his arms, protecting her even in his exhausted state. They lay in silence for a long time, their hearts beating a frantic, synchronized rhythm against each other's chests, a shared pulse. The city lights twinkled outside the window, but inside their small world had been remade, transformed by their connection. Augusto finally broke the silence, his voice rough with emotion, raw and unvarnished. "All of me," he whispered into her hair, holding her tighter, possessive but tender, "is yours, completely, irrevocably," and curled against the solid strength of him, feeling safe and protected, listening to the steady beat of his heart. Cecilia knew with a certainty that shook her to her soul that hers was irrevocably his, that their destinies were intertwined. The morning sun streamed into the kitchen, painting everything in warm gold, infusing the space with a sense of peace and tranquility. Cecilia hummed to herself, moving with a grace that had become as natural as breathing, a quiet confidence that radiated from within. This vast, once cold and sterile apartment was now a home, filled with the comforting smell of coffee and the bright colors of the flowers Augusto had delivered every Tuesday, a small ritual of love. The sound of his footsteps made her smile before she even turned around, a visceral reaction to his presence. His arms slid around her waist from behind, pulling her back against his solid chest, his embrace possessive and comforting. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling deeply, savoring her scent. "You're up early," he murmured, his voice still rough with sleep, a husky timbre that sent a thrill through her. But now it was a thrill of belonging, of comfort, of shared intimacy. "I wanted to make you breakfast," she said, leaning back into his embrace, trusting him completely. "You have that meeting today, that important negotiation." He turned her in his arms, his gaze soft, his eyes filled with a tenderness that belied his reputation. The man who faced the world with a heart of ice, the ruthless Mafia boss, now looked at her with a warmth that could melt glaciers, a love that transformed him. The change in him was a miracle she witnessed every day, a testament to their connection. He was still Augusto, the most powerful and dangerous man in the city, a force to be reckoned with. Men still feared his name, his quiet tone, his unyielding will, but with her the walls came down, the barriers dissolved. He shared his worries about business, his frustrations, his hopes for a future that was quieter, safer, a future free from the shadows of his past. He had even cried in her arms once, after a loss from the old life had cut deeper than he'd expected, revealing a vulnerability she had never imagined. "The meeting can wait," he said, his fingers tracing the line of her jaw, his touch feather-light. "This moment with you." He kissed her, and it was nothing like that first questioning kiss, that hesitant exploration. This was a kiss of knowing, of deep, abiding love, a connection that transcended words. It was slow and sweet and spoke of lazy mornings and passionate nights, of shared secrets and unwavering devotion. Months of being loved by him had transformed Cecilia, had given her a new sense of self. The scared girl who had stood trembling in his office, facing an impossible choice, was gone. In her place was a woman who knew her own strength, a woman who was respected, cherished, and loved completely, body and soul. She had not just married the Mafia boss. She had tamed his wild heart. And in return, he had given her the world, his entire being. Later that evening, he led her out onto the spacious terrace, his hand protectively on the small of her back. The city glittered below them like a carpet of fallen stars, a breathtaking panorama. The air was cool, and he wrapped a blanket around her shoulders, his hands resting there, possessive and tender. "I have something for you," he said, his tone unusually solemn, his expression serious. "Augusto, you've given me everything." Cecilia protested with a soft laugh, gesturing to the world around them, encompassing their life together. "Not everything," he said quietly, his gaze unwavering. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, worn velvet box, his movements deliberate. Her breath hitched, her heart skipping a beat. He didn't get down on one knee. Their story was past that, beyond such traditional gestures. Instead, he stood before her, his eyes locked with hers, and opened the box, revealing its contents. Inside wasn't a flashy new diamond, a symbol of wealth and power, but a beautiful old ring, steeped in history and sentiment. The gold was warm and softly glowing, worn smooth with age, holding a single deep blue sapphire surrounded by tiny, delicate diamonds, their facets catching the light. It looked like a piece of history, a fragment of a soul, imbued with untold stories. "This was my mother's," Augusto said, his voice thick with an emotion that made Cecilia's eyes well with tears, a tenderness she had rarely seen. It was the only thing of value she managed to keep through a very hard life, a constant reminder of hope. "She told me to give it to the woman who owned my heart, not just my name, the woman who truly saw me." He took the ring from the box, his fingers trembling slightly. The platinum wedding band she wore felt modern and cold next to it, a stark contrast. He slid the older ring onto her finger right next to it, a symbolic gesture of merging past and present. It fit perfectly, as if it had always been meant to be there, destined to adorn her hand. "That night, I told you that you would take all of me," he said, his thumb stroking over the new, ancient ring on her finger, a possessive caress. "I thought I was claiming you, taking possession. I was a fool, arrogant and misguided. I was begging you to claim me, to take me as your own." A tear escaped and traced a path down Cecilia's cheek, a silent testament to her emotions. "You didn't just take all of me that night, Cecilia," he vowed, his voice low and fervent, filled with a passion that was both fierce and tender, a love that consumed him. "You own it completely and irrevocably. You own my heart, my soul, every fiber of my being. You own every breath I take, every beat of my heart. It is all yours, forever." Cecilia looked from the ring, a piece of the vulnerable boy he had once been, to the man he was now, a man who had given her his entire scarred and powerful heart, his unwavering devotion. She reached up and cupped his face, her touch as gentle as his had been the first time he'd undressed her, a reciprocal act of tenderness. "And I give you all of me," she whispered, her voice strong and clear, radiating love and conviction. "Not because of a deal, not because I had to, not because I was forced into it, but because I want to, because it is my deepest desire. I love you, Augusto, with every fiber of my being." He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly it felt as if their two souls were knitting together for all eternity, bound by an unbreakable thread. The city lights twinkled below them, their brilliance reflecting in their eyes, a silent promise of a future filled with love and happiness. Beneath them, the valley lay still and quiet, a silent observer to the promises they exchanged. Their perilous start had guided them to the secure haven, to a love meant to last in eternity. He bent his head, and his lips met hers in a kiss that transcended beginnings and endings, existing instead as a beautiful, timeless commitment. This thrilling love story commenced with a vow and culminated in forever. If the tale of Augusto and Cecilia has left your heart pounding, then you're in the right place. Subscribe now to discover more stories brimming with passionate, exhilarating romance where love triumphs over all obstacles. We have countless more narratives waiting to be shared with you. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from and what aspects of their journey resonated with you the most. Was it the palpable tension, the gentle tenderness, or the remarkable transformation that stole your heart? We're committed to reading each and every comment.